The term genetics was coined at the beginning of the 20th century to describe the study of hereditary traits in human beings. At that time, when this river was full of coal barges and merchant ships, people weren't too worried about diseases that ran in families. 1 in 3 children died before they reached adulthood, so there were many bigger problems to face. But things have changed, and genetic diseases now make up a large proportion of the problems faced by modern healthcare systems. I'd like to tell you something about my work as a clinical geneticist to help you to understand how to deal with these problems in the clinic. Over the last 30 years or so, specialist services have developed in most countries to deal with genetic diseases. But there are so many different genetic diseases, they're a very common problem. And now that genetic testing is so much easier, more and more people need help to deal with these problems. So any doctor, nurse or midwife might find themselves faced with these questions. I'd like to give you an insight into how we deal with some of the questions that we meet in the genetic clinic to help you to deal with these problems when you face them. Before you go into the clinic, it's important to think about the problems you might be facing. Online Mendelian Inheritance in Man, or MIM, the website, is a useful resource, and there are many like it, which can give you the information you need to be prepared for the questions you might face. When you get to the clinic, you will find that the problems fall into very common patterns, and the next few clips of DVD will take you through the scenarios that we frequently face. I've recorded these with 2 actors, Selina and Dominic, and we've tried to recreate some of the situations that you might meet in clinical practice. We found that people come to the genetic clinic for different reasons. Some we call the passive attenders, the ones who just were told to turn up by their doctor but don't know why. The information gatherers, the ones who come in to find out all there is to know, but they have no particular reason to come to genetics. And then the agenda setters, the ones who have very definite genetic questions that they need an answer to. It's essential at the beginning of a consultation to work out why people have turned up and what their questions are.
Hello.
Hi Selina, nice to meet you. Have a seat.
Dominic,
hi. My name's John Byrne, I'm the consultant clinical geneticist, and I've been asked to have a chat with you. I'd like to first of all ask, why are you here?
We're not really sure. We spoke to our doctor and he said that it was important for us to come in and see a specific person about genetics.
Okay, and are you happy to be here? You didn't get sent?
Slightly worried, but...
We just want to know why, really. So.
Okay, fine.
Hello.
Hi Selina, have a seat.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi. Hi, my name's John Byrne, I'm the consultant in clinical genetics, and I've been asked to see you. Can I ask, first of all, what brought you here? Was it your idea or somebody else's?
We actually spent quite a lot of time on the internet recently, and we wanted to ask a few questions about that. We've been looking at lots of information we've seen.
Okay, so you basically just want to know everything there is to know about the problem?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Selina. Hello. Have a seat.
Thank you.
Hi. Hello. Welcome. My name's John Byrne. I'm the consultant in clinical genetics, and I've been asked to have a chat with you. Can I begin by asking you how you got to be here? What brings you?
Well, we've got a few specific questions to give you a bit of background. I'm 37 and I'd like to have a baby, but I'm very concerned about the potential risk of Down syndrome, so I wanted to ask you specific questions that relate to that particular.
Okay. What we saw there were 3 different arrivals into a genetic clinic, and it's very important when you're doing genetic counselling to find out how people got there. Were they sent? Sometimes people get told to go because someone else thinks they shouldn't have children. So it's very important to know whether they're there voluntarily and what their agenda is. There are many thousands of genetic diseases and syndromes, and there's many people who turn up where we don't have a simple explanation. But the interesting thing is that the questions that we face are often remarkably similar. So Selena, tell me, what exactly is it that worries you about your age?
Well, I've heard that as you get older, as you progress in years, so does your chance of giving birth to a Down syndrome child. So I wanted to ask, when is there a particular line that is crossed when the percentage goes up? What the chances are, if there's any way that we can find out before we conceive what the chances are, and also after conceiving, how soon can we find out if that baby has a problem, and if there's anything that we can do before we conceive to lessen the risk of it.
Okay. Have you had any contact with Down syndrome?
To an extent, yes.
Do you know, have you met babies or adults with Down syndrome?
Yeah, one or two. We have a couple of friends who have experienced it, and obviously their lives are made more difficult by it.
Sure.
Quite a lot more difficult by it.
But I'm very desperate to have a baby, no matter what.
I think it's important as well, though, to know that, you know, we're open to the notion of not going through with it if it's not going to be okay.
Well, he says we, but I have to be honest and say that I do have an issue with aborting children. I was raised Catholic, and it's not something that I agree with. I know it would cause problems in my family, and I just really want to have a baby. But obviously,
but at the same time, we don't want it to get to the stage where it's, you know, really going to impact on our lives. I don't think that we, you know, there's still time. I don't think we necessarily have to go through with having a child with an imperfection.
Sure.
I'm sure we can.
Well, let's run through some of the sort of background causes, and then let's come back to talking about some of the difficult issues, which is not uncommon, because this is a very difficult area to deal with. What we heard there were a lot of the typical questions that come into a genetic clinic. Doctors will always be asked what's wrong with me, what the treatment is, what the future holds. That's diagnosis and prognosis and therapy. But in genetic clinics, there are some very specific questions. People want to know, what's the risk of something happening? What's the risk of it happening again? If it does happen again, will it be as bad? And more important in this sort of situation, are there any tests? And that might be a prenatal test, or it might be a predictive test for a late onset disease. Either way, there are lots of very complicated emotional issues to be addressed. And we've already hit one of them straight away, a not uncommon situation where prenatal diagnosis involves termination of pregnancy, and people might not want to go ahead with that. And especially if the couple disagree, that can be an obvious source of major problems in the future. Genetic consultations can take place in the patient's own home, in the ward, or in the outpatient clinic. Wherever you are, it's important to think about where people sit when you have the conversation. This is particularly important when you have visitors or students in the clinic with you. Selena, hi. Nice to meet you. Have a seat, Dominic. Hello. Hi, my name's John Byrne. I'm the consultant clinical geneticist. And can I first of all introduce my colleagues that you weren't expecting to meet? Anne-Marie Gerdes, who is Professor of Genetics in Denmark and is working with me in the clinic at the moment. And Sama is training as a genetic counsellor, and she's from Jordan, and she's helping us in the clinic as an assistant at the moment.
Okay.
Can I ask you what brought you to the clinic? Why are you here? When you meet someone in a genetic clinic, they're tense and they're anxious and they're not expected to see other people in the room, so it's very important that everyone's introduced from the outset. It's also important where those people sit. Sama and Anne-Marie are listening in on this consultation, but they're not delivering it. It's important that they're not facing the patients. It's equally important they're not sitting behind them, because that makes people feel very anxious. So the best place is to sit them at 90 degrees to the line of conversation. Then they can take part if they need to, but most of the time they'll sit back and stay out of the way. Common trisomies like Down syndrome often don't end up in the genetic clinic nowadays, but chromosome problems still present particular counselling problems, especially where there are chromosome rearrangements like reciprocal translocations. The next two sections deal with counselling of a reciprocal translocation. So, Selena and Dominic, can you tell me what you've been told so far and what brought you to see me today?
Well, we've come in to receive some results from the chromosome test. We had suffered 4 miscarriages, and then when our 5th baby went to full term, it died with multiple malformations.
Okay.
So we want to know why.
What was the baby called?
The baby was called David.
Okay. And David had some tests, as you know, after he was born. Has anyone told you the results of any of those tests?
No.
Okay. Well, lots of tests are obviously done whenever a baby's born with a problem to find out the reason why. And one of the things we do is we look at the chromosomes. That's the genetic material that we get from mum and dad in the eggs and sperm. And that contains the instruction book, the blueprint, and how the body's put together. And what we found in David, which was what we suspected we might find because of all the miscarriages he'd had, was that there was a problem with his chromosomes, that he had inherited a broken chromosome that caused the problems. And in fact, the reason that we asked for your blood samples to be sent in at the same time was so we could see if either of you had a chromosome rearrangement that could provide an explanation for that. And what we found, in fact, is that in fact one of you does. It's on your side, Dominic. Now, this can happen to any of us. We all carry chromosome breaks and rearrangements, and usually they're not affecting our eggs and sperm, so they don't get passed on. But if you get a broken chromosome in either the ovary or the testis where the eggs and sperm are made, then it can cause problems. Now, I'd like to explain that to you and then try and answer some of your questions from there. So the first thing to say is that David had an extra bit of chromosome that he shouldn't have had. And the reason for that, actually, if I might just use some pens, because it's actually quite difficult to explain otherwise. So imagine that these are your chromosomes, Dominic. So you're passing on pairs of chromosomes. You get one from each pair to pass on. And in fact, in chromosomes 2 and 5, in your case, there's been a rearrangement, what we call a translocation. So at some time, either when you were conceived or further back in your family, 2 chromosomes broke and the ends swapped around. So when the 2 bits were put back together, what should have been the red one got the orange tip, and what should have been the orange one got the red tip. And that's what we call a translocation. It makes no difference to you. It's just like having a book where the pages have been rearranged. You've still got all the instructions. But it presents a particular problem when you come to make a sperm. Because what you have to do is take one of the red pair and one of the orange pair to pass on. Now, if you pass on this pair that are both broken, are both rearranged, you're still passing on a whole red one and a whole orange one. But if you pass on the normal orange one with this red one that's got a piece of orange on the top, you're actually passing on 2 bits that shouldn't be there. There should only be one version of. Okay, so you've now passed on in the sperm a whole orange and a red with a piece of orange attached to it. And when that meets the egg containing one red one and one orange one, you've now got 2 whole orange plus an extra bit. And in fact, you've got a bit of the red one missing. So you've got a duplication of one bit of information and a deletion of the other bit. And that causes complete upset in the development of the pregnancy.
So if I inherited that, how come it didn't happen the generation before me?
Okay, if it came down through your family, then what we assume is that the egg or the sperm that made you contained the 2 chromosomes with the rearrangement. So you actually got all of the material you needed, albeit in a rearranged order.
Right.
But it's only if you pass on one of these but not the other one that you can end up passing on an unbalanced set of information. So we call that an unbalanced translocation.
So it is possible that he can have mixed around chromosomes but still be able to conceive a healthy baby?
Absolutely.
If he happens to not pass them on in the wrong way?
And you've been really unlucky so far, because almost certainly what's happened is every time so far the sperm that fertilised the egg had one of these unbalances. Either it had an extra bit of orange and a missing bit of red, or an extra bit of red and a missing bit of orange, but each way it either causes a miscarriage, or if it isn't quite so severe, you get through to being born but with multiple abnormalities. And in fact, this is something that happens quite a lot, or chromosomal abnormalities happen a lot. So around about 1 in 12 of all recognised pregnancies among all people are lost as a result of chromosome problems. Usually it's things like Down syndrome, where you just get a whole extra chromosome. This particular type is rarer, this idea of a translocation, but it's very important because it can happen again, but we can test for it. So the important thing for you to both realise is that although you've had a really rough ride so far, if you are still keen to try again, and once you've had time to recover from losing David, and that takes some time, but you need to give yourselves time to recover. But if you do try again, there is basically a 50-50 chance that you will have a sperm that either has the complete normal set of chromosomes or has the 2 broken ones that will produce a carrier of a translocation like Dom, but will be perfectly healthy.
And the odds are 50-50.
So basically there are 4 possibilities. There's a completely normal set, there's the translocation balanced set, both of which will be normal babies. There's having an extra bit of orange and a missing bit of red, and we think that probably causes a miscarriage, or an extra bit of red and a missing bit of orange that you can survive, but you have major problems.
So it's a 1 in 4 chance of having the same thing again.
1 in 4 chance of having exactly the same thing, and a 1 in 4 chance of having something like it that's probably rather worse and would cause a miscarriage.
Right.
But there's a half chance that you'd get away with it each time. Now there are 2 ways around this. Obviously you could just keep trying and just leave nature to take its course, or of course you could do testing early in pregnancy to see whether it's an affected baby, and if it is, then go for a termination of pregnancy rather than just press on, because we know that it's a very severe problem.
Would you recommend a termination at that point? Is there any chance that we could have a translocation,
Yeah.
and that the baby could be only damaged
Mildly
to
affected. I think what we know about the amount of chromosomal material involved is that if the baby survives, it will have a severe learning disability. It might not be quite as severely affected as David was, and might not die, but would almost certainly be unable to live independently.
Right.
So it is a very severe problem. So we can test in pregnancy or leave it to nature depending on how you feel. But the other thing I want you to think about, because it's actually another way around this, you've had a fairly rough ride, and if you can't face all of that uncertainty, the other option is to go for sperm donation. Now this isn't something that instantly springs to mind, but it's something we do organise for couples who have an infertility problem where the father can't achieve a pregnancy. Because obviously if you went for a baby by sperm donation, then you would be avoiding this problem. It would still be registered as your baby. The rest of the world would regard it as your baby. We don't have to tell them it's not your baby entirely. It's obviously it is yours, Selina. And it's a way of sidestepping the biological problem. Now, not everyone goes for this. It's not an immediately attractive option for 2 reasons. First of all, from the dad's point of view, because basically, I always say that men only sort of do 2 things. They donate the sperm and then they phone to say how much the baby weighed. And if you take away the first part, then you haven't got much left of a contribution. So men don't naturally want to do this. But on the other hand, it does sidestep the problem. And at the moment, I guess, having a baby is what really is most important to you. The other thing that tends to put people off it is just the thought of doing it. It sounds unpleasant, and in fact it's a bit like having a cervical smear, and people who've had it done, they go to a gynecologist, and instead of having a smear, the sperm sample's put into the neck of the womb at the time you're ovulating. So it's a relatively straightforward procedure. I'm not trying to sell you it, I just want you to know about it, because it's important to have all of the options in front of you. Okay? I've given you a lot of information there. I'm going to write you a letter with a diagram to show you what I've just done, and I want you to take that away and think about it, and then I'd like, if we could, to meet again to talk about that. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Selina, Dominic, thanks for coming in. Can I start by asking you, how did you get here? What were you told before you came to the clinic?
We've been trying to have a baby, obviously, and we had 4 miscarriages before David, and David died, and we think, well, we've been told it might be something genetic, so
Okay.
we've had this chromosome test.
Okay, fine. And how long is it now since David died?
6 weeks.
And how old was he when he died?
It's a couple of days old.
Okay. So you know from the clinic and the paediatric team that David had something wrong with his chromosomes, and we asked for a sample to be sent in from the two of you, and I'd like to try and explain. It's a little bit complicated, but start with the bottom line. The reason that David died was that he had multiple internal malformations of his organs. Had he not died, he would have had very severe learning disability, because we know his brain was malformed as well. So the cause of that was that he had a problem with the genetic information. He had an unbalanced set of genes. Instead of getting one copy from each of you, he had some genes where he had 3 copies and other genes where he only had 1 copy. And it was that unbalanced set of genes that caused the problem. Now the genes are carried on chromosomes rather like beads on a string, and so you can't see the genes, but you can see the chromosomes down the microscope, and that's what we've been looking at. When we looked at David's chromosomes, we could see that there was something wrong. There was a chromosome that was the wrong shape, and we've now tested the two of you, and we found actually that you, Dominic, carry what we call a balanced translocation. So that means that we now know why this happened. It was caused by the sperm that made David had an unbalanced set of chromosomes in it.
Just the one sperm that happened.
Well, it turns out, because the blood test we did on you shows that you carry a balanced rearrangement, means that every cell in your testis that's making sperm has this chromosome problem, and so might produce an unbalanced sperm each time. In fact, it's about 50-50 whether or not the sperm will come out with a balanced set of genetic information or an unbalanced set.
So it's nothing to do with the combination of us, it's just me.
In this case, it's basically down to the material coming in the sperm.
And there's nothing wrong with the genes or the chromosomes that I passed on?
No. Now that's, I know, a bit of a bombshell. However, there is some good news in this, although you might not see it straight away. First of all, the reason we asked for your samples was because of the miscarriages. The fact that you had so many miscarriages gave us a clue that this might be a translocation. And what's been happening is that you've just really had an unlucky run, in the sense that each time you got pregnant, it was a 50-50 chance whether the baby would have a working set of chromosomes or not. And as it happens, you've had at least 5 pregnancies where it's gone the wrong way, rather like tossing a coin and it coming down heads 5 times in a row. It's unusual, but not impossible.
So is that going to happen every time we try and
Well,
have a
no,
baby?
it's just like tossing a coin, in fact. So each time you get pregnant, it's a 50-50 chance you get it right. And even though you've had a bad run, it's still 50-50 each time.
It's still 50-50, so law of averages wouldn't suggest that next time we have an increased chance of it being successful.
No, unfortunately, it's they say that chance has no memory.
You
So
go
it
back
doesn't
to
matter
the
how
same
many times
spot.
you toss a penny and it landed heads, it's still 50-50 next time you toss the coin.
Right.
Okay? So basically, the first thing to get straight is that we know why David had the problem, because of this translocation in Dominic. The second thing to realise is this is not an issue of fault or blame. Any of us could carry translocations. Maybe about 1 in 1,000 people do. We just never know about it. Because in your case, Dominic, the chromosomes are all there, it's just they've been rearranged. I'd like to try and explain that to you if I could, because it's actually, I think it might make it a little bit easier to see what we're talking about.
And have I inherited it from my mum and dad then?
We don't know that yet. We know that it's present in your blood, it's throughout your body, so it was present from when you were conceived. It might have started with you, or it might have come down through the family. Can we come back to that later? And let's first of all just understand how it works. Now, I've been pinching Lego out of the toy box outside, because this is actually quite an easy way of explaining it. So if chromosomes come in matching pairs, one from mum and one from dad, and there are 23 pairs altogether. But I'm just going to look at the 2 pairs that are involved in this particular chromosome rearrangement. So I've just arranged the blocks into 2 colours. So there are your number 2 chromosomes, Selena, and there are your number 5 chromosomes, okay? And these are the same chromosomes for you, Dominic, where I've arranged them, and you can see immediately that there is a swap over. What's happened at some point at your conception or before was that 2 chromosomes broke simultaneously. Chromosomes are quite fragile, they break all the time, but they get put back together. But if they both break at the same time, there's a chance you might swap the ends over. So you've got all of the genes you need, but they aren't arranged correctly. So when you come to make a sperm, it depends how these pair up. And the possibility is that you could make an egg that contains one of each, and you could take that one, and you get an entirely normal set of chromosomes, okay? Or you could take the middle two, and you would again have an entirely balanced set of chromosomes, but you've transmitted the translocation, so it could cause problems in next generation. But that baby would also be like Dominic, perfectly normal and have no problems, okay? The problem arises if you pass on this yellow one with that blue one, or the other way around, if you pass on that blue one with that yellow one. Now, if you take that combination, for example, what we've now got is 2 blues, 1.5 yellows, and an extra bit of blue.
Too much blue.
So too much blue and not enough yellow. So 3 copies of some genes and only 1 copy of others. And that's an unbalanced translocation. What we think is that if you get that way around, then you end up with a survivable but severe malformation. If you get the other way around, it's such a severe problem it causes a miscarriage. So either way, you end up with a problem. You end up with a baby that's got a severe problem. But as you can see, it's a 50-50 chance. It's purely random chance which chromosome pair come together.
And there's nothing that we can do in terms of the way babies conceive, nutrition or anything. There's nothing that we can do
Absolutely.
to help to increase the odds either way.
No, there isn't. And in fact, I mean, because we always like to think it's simply what we ate or whether we took tablets or, you did all the right things, I'm sure, when you got pregnant. The trouble is this is basically completely chance event, and it's something that can happen to anybody. And it does happen to a lot of people. Of course, they never know about it. Lots of people have miscarriages but then go on to have a healthy child. It's only if a baby gets tested that we actually discover the translocation. Translocations are one of the more complicated things to explain. People will normally use a diagram. I don't like using diagrams because if I'm working with a diagram, I'm not looking at the people I'm talking to, so I can't see if they understand. I quite like using a pen top because that's something people can get their head round, but the Lego idea is actually also quite a useful way of explaining translocation. It's very visual, it's very easy to understand, and the Lego can be kept in the clinic and used for children to play with, so it's quite a useful aid to teaching people how translocations work. Discovering a translocation in a family makes it necessary to think about other family members to see whether the translocation has travelled through the family for several generations. Tracing those family members can present particular counselling problems. Selina, Dominic, nice to see you again. We talked briefly before about the translocation running in the family and how it explained how David had been born with multiple birth problems because of that. I explained to you about translocations, and Dominic, I explained that you carried this balanced rearrangement or translocation. I'd like to talk now about 2 things. First of all, your own opportunities for having another baby, because a bit more time has passed now, and I think it's time for us to think through these issues and also to think about the implications for the wider family. So the first thing is to say, you remember I told you there was a 50-50 chance each time you achieved a pregnancy whether the baby would be affected or not. You could just take the chance, or we can do a test and scan and do a sample in pregnancy and find out whether the baby's got an unbalanced set of chromosomes. How do you feel about that?
We talked about it, and I think that going the route of the test would be the best thing to do.
Okay. Dom, do you feel the same?
Yeah, I do. I'd rather take that route because it feels more natural.
The one thing that I will mention, although you probably just put it aside, but just so you're aware of it, I know that you've had a lot of pregnancies have not succeeded and you're keen to get pregnant and have a baby. If you have any problems achieving pregnancy, or if you have any second thoughts about testing in pregnancy, the other option you can opt for is something that you wouldn't naturally think of, and that's sperm donation. So we normally use that as a treatment for couples who are infertile. But of course, in this situation, if you were to achieve a pregnancy with a donor sperm, then you would avoid the chromosome problem. Now, most couples don't go for it either because the dad, thinks, the only thing I do is kind of donate the sperm and phone to say what the baby weighed after it's born. So if you take away the sperm contribution, you're not really the dad. But of course, you are the dad in every social sense. When the baby's born, you are signed up as the father of the child and would be raising the child. So it's a bit like adoption in that sense for the father. But it does allow you to achieve a pregnancy without all of the trauma and risk of further terminations or losses. The other thing that puts people off is just the thought of doing it. It sounds rather unpleasant. It's actually just like having a cervical smear, which I'm sure you've had done already. And it's just, you go to the gynecologist, but instead of a smear, they actually insert the sperm sample into the neck of the womb at a time when you're ovulating. So that's an option, okay? And I'll put that in my letter to you just so you can think about it. And if you want to learn more about that, I can refer you on to the gynae clinic to talk about it.
Okay.
But otherwise, if you want to just go ahead and try for a pregnancy, we'll see you in our clinic with the obstetric team as soon as you achieve the pregnancy and scan you and then organise all the tests from then on. The other thing most important that I want to talk to you about is that I said last time we spoke, Dominic, that this was something that was present when you were conceived, but of course it could be that either your mum or your dad carried this rearrangement. Now of course they are no longer alive, so we can't test them. But I know you've got a sister when we took the family tree before, so there's a possibility that your sister is a carrier of that translocation. So what I'd like to do, with your permission, is contact her and ask her if she'd like to send us a sample.
I don't speak to my sister.
Okay. Are you in touch with her at all?
No.
She lives, I think, in London, is that right?
Yeah.
Do you know where she lives?
Yeah.
I mean, how would you feel about me just dealing with it and writing to her myself? I mean, you don't need to be involved.
I don't want to have any. I'd rather not know.
You won't be anything to do with it, though, will you? This is.
Yeah, but
This is just for.
But this
That's
is
them
all
to
confidential, isn't it? From our point of view, and I don't want to include her in it.
She probably wouldn't even know you'd been involved there, would it?
So what do you mean?
Well, I mean, if you tell me where she lives and what her address is, then I can write to her and just get her GP to send us in a sample.
I'm sorry, we don't talk at all.
I don't see what that has to do with it, though. I think it's only fair if she's privy to this information.
I'll talk about.
I don't talk to her either, obviously because of Tom, but it may well be the case that she wants to conceive a child, and it's important.
You can
that she knows this,
see our dilemma in a sense, because you're my patient and you're the person I look after, but obviously in a genetic clinic we have to think of the wider family, and so
we're not like a normal family, though. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure, I mean, and it's not uncommon that people have issues and there are other, reasons why they don't want to talk to each other.
I just don't understand why you don't want her to receive this information.
Because you know what it's like between me and her, and there's no way that.
Yeah, but it's not going to mean you have any contact with her personally, is it? You won't have to talk to her at any point.
Can I put something to you? This you might feel I'm twisting your arm here a bit, which I am a little bit, but can I just put a thought to you? I know you said that your sister had a couple of babies herself, so I wanted to roll forward about 20 years from now, and if you open the door one day and there's a young woman there holding a baby with a severe malformation and said, "You're my uncle," and I've just found out that you knew that this might happen, how will you answer that niece?
You've got the opportunity to change that now. I just don't know why you're not doing it.
Just because I
mean, I don't want to know why. Clearly there is things happened in your family that I don't need to know about. What I'm saying is that it's not just you and your sister. This is actually other people's lives are potentially involved here as well. And I think, if you imagine how you would feel as a couple. I don't
see why I should help her.
I'd like you to go away and think about this, because it's actually really quite important, not just to you and Selena and your sister, but to your sister's family and their family. I mean, this could be something that would come back to bite us 30, 40, 50 years from now. And that's the real issue here. I think this is, I mean, your sister's probably finished her family now, but her children are going to grow up and could be carrying this translocation. So I think it's an issue you need to think very hard about.
And you have no
we don't
issue
need
with
it-
them?
We don't need to decide this now. I'd like you to go away and think about what I've said, because I think it's a very important topic. It's very important for you either way, I understand that. And I wouldn't ask if I didn't think it was important to the other members of your family. But as I say, the thing to take away with you is this is not going to involve you talking to your sister, and it isn't benefiting her necessarily. It's actually for people you don't even know.
So if you were to speak to her, would you tell her what's happened with us, or would you keep that?
We would need your permission to say that we have found in her family this chromosome rearrangement, because otherwise why would I contact her?
It's fine with me.
Let's leave it and leave you to think about it. I'm going to send you a letter and I'll send you a reply slip, and if you decide that you want me to do this, then you sign that, give me the contact details, and we'll do the rest. That is a true story that I was confronted by several years ago. I never did find out what it was that made Dominic so fearful of, or positively against, contacting his sister, but we can all imagine that there are all sorts of stories behind this sort of position. We can't ultimately breach the confidentiality of the families that we meet. We have to work with them. But I think it's very important that we also confront people with the consequences of their actions, and sometimes that doesn't immediately spring out. In the true case that I dealt with this, the person involved relented and gave me the address, and I think that was the right outcome. But it is very difficult. This is a situation where being non-directive carries significant consequences, and so there are occasions in a genetic clinic where you might have to lean on people a little bit and try to get them to do the right thing. From the moment a genetic disorder, a malformation or a stillborn child occurs in a family, people begin to speculate on why it happened. Sometimes those explanations can be very hurtful to the parents or the family members, and it's essential that you find out what other people think is the cause of the problem. Selena, Dominic, thanks for coming in. It's a pleasure to see you. My name's John Byrne. I'm the consultant in genetics, and I know you had been asking some questions about the loss of your baby. Can I ask what your baby was called?
David.
Okay, and how long is it now since David died?
It's been 2 months.
All right. What have you been told so far about the cause of David's problem?
We haven't been at all.
Okay. I didn't see David when he was alive, but we were sent all the pictures and all the details by the paediatrician, and also some x-rays taken of him, so I'm quite confident of the diagnosis in David. He had a rare genetic condition which we call thanatophoric dysplasia, which is, and I'll write this down for you in a letter afterwards, but basically it's a very severe problem with a spelling mistake in a gene. And it means that his bones stopped growing too soon, and his ribs were so short that he couldn't breathe, and therefore he died. And all children with this condition do die, and so we can be very confident of the cause of the problem. Before I go on and tell you a bit more about that, I'd like to just ask you, this was your first pregnancy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it a planned pregnancy?
Yes.
You were sort of thinking of getting pregnant, but you weren't.
Yeah, it kind of happened
You
sooner
weren't
than we were
avoiding
thinking.
getting pregnant. Okay. Were you on any medications or any prescriptions from the
No.
doctor? And during the early stages of the pregnancy, before you realised you were pregnant, were you taking anything or doing anything, drinking or whatever, that you wished you hadn't been afterwards?
No.
You seem a little hesitant there. Was there something in your mind that you were uncertain about?
You only had a couple of drinks at the start before you
A
knew
couple
you
of
were
drinks,
pregnant.
yeah, a couple of drinks.
But then
Obviously I stopped as soon as I knew.
Was there anything in the pregnancy that you think might have been a cause for the problem? Because people usually sort of think about what they did and think it was something I did.
Well, what does cause the disorder that you mentioned, what sort of thing are you talking about?
It's basically caused by a new mutation. It's a spelling mistake in a gene. So, in fact, whatever people think in terms of, usually they think it was something I ate or something I drank or something I took. In fact, there's no evidence that this could be caused by that. This is something that happened either when the egg or the sperm were being made, and it was a spelling mistake when the genes were being copied.
So it's nothing to do with anything that I might have done that I shouldn't have?
Nothing that you did when you were pregnant could have made any difference whatsoever.
Okay, well in that case I feel able to tell you that I did use cocaine once, and I worked out that it was a week or two after conception.
Has that been weighing on your mind a bit? That's quite common. I mean, people always look back to the pregnancy and...
So it's got nothing to do with that?
Not at all.
Okay.
It had already happened before that point.
Good.
It's very important that, because people very often think about the pregnancy and think about an injection or a flu tablet, you know, some medication or whatever, and they naturally assume that's the cause.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
It's very important to really press people on what they think caused the problem. You will hear all sorts of old wives' tales. People very often think about events in pregnancy, often quite trivial events. They had a flu jab, or they had a viral infection, or they took paracetamol. But it's important to get that out in the open, because then you can deal with it and reassure people, usually, that it had nothing to do with the cause. Or if it might have been a factor, then at least you can talk through what that means, because of course the good news is if that was the cause, then it wouldn't be the cause if they didn't take that substance in a future pregnancy. The main question that I know will be in your mind now is what happens next. So we've explained the cause of the problem, we've made a diagnosis in David. The good news is that this almost certainly began with David and obviously ended with David, because he couldn't have children, he didn't survive to have children of his own. So in theory, next time you get pregnant, there's no risk, no greater risk than anyone else. In fact, there is a slight increased risk, and the reason we've discovered is that these spelling mistakes don't always happen in the egg or the sperm. They could happen one or two steps further back up the production line. So you could have a group of cells in one testis where that spelling mistake occurred, and it's sort of in the blueprint. It's a bit like having a car factory where one of the lines is not putting windscreens in. So you get a stream of cars coming off that production line with a bit missing, even though the rest of the production system is working fine.
So how do we know how likely that will be?
Well, I can tell you that just from looking at other families in your position, it's actually a very small risk. It's less than 1% that this will happen a second time.
Right.
So the important thing, though, is that when you do get pregnant, we like to offer you a detailed ultrasound scan as a reassurance, because obviously in it, whatever I say, you're going to be anxious during the pregnancy, and having a detailed scan will give you a chance to make sure that all is well.
At what point?
Well, we would be able to say, even as soon as sort of 11 or 12 weeks, the obstetric team would be able to see that the proportion of the baby's arms and legs looked fine. So, you know, and sometimes people, you know, kind of want to wait until they've got back past that stage before they announce the pregnancy. But I mean, to be truthful, the probability is extremely high that the baby will be fine. So I don't think you need to worry too much about it. But it will give you that extra reassurance to see that the scan's giving a normal appearance.
Okay.
The classic pattern of inheritance is autosomal dominant, where a single faulty copy of the gene causes the problem. And Huntington's disease is often quoted as a typical example. The next two clips show a patient suffering from Huntington's disease to show what a devastating condition this is. Ivy, thanks for coming down to make this video. As I explained to you before, the idea is to make a short teaching video about Huntington's chorea, just to talk a little bit about how it affects people, and also to show how it's affecting your movements and so on now. Just to quickly go over the story again, you were born in West Hartlepool, is that right?
Yes.
And how many sisters were you? How many were you in family?
8.
There were 8 of you.
Right.
Now, your mother actually developed Huntington's career when she was 31
31, right.
and died when she was 46.
46, right.
Your father died quite young and you ended up going into care, is that
Yes,
right? With
right.
the
Nuns,
with the
Catholic
nuns, the
sisters.
Catholic sisters. You then went to school, grew up, trained as a children's nurse, is that right?
Mhm.
And emigrated to,
Yes.
to Canada, in fact, wasn't it, in 1952?
Right.
Did you know about the history of Huntington's career at that time?
Yes, I think Jimmy had somehow got with the doctor in Leeds who was practicing at Leeds that time.
And that's how you found out about it?
Yes.
But you went to America mainly to make money, you told me.
Yes, right.
A lot of nurses do the same now, don't they? And when you're you went to Canada first, then to America, and ended up in New York.
Yes.
At what age were you when you first realised that the Huntington's career was affecting you too?
Maybe 56.
Was it 46, I think you
No,
told me?
maybe, yes.
Yeah,
dying.
that's right.
With death and dying.
And how did it affect you at first?
It was thinking about being on borrowed time.
Yeah, it
Living
was
on borrowed
knowing what
time.
had happened to your mother.
Right.
Now you now are actually doing quite well, aren't you? You're now 60 years old.
Yes,
And
apparently, yes.
What brought you back to this country?
I'm actually homesick.
All right, so you've come back to the northeast again. Now, you're back full circle. What I'd like to do is, we've been through all the examination in detail before, but can we just go through one or two of the things again that we talked about, okay? We'll start with your eye movements. Can you just look straight at me, look at my finger, follow it across that way, keep your head still, and follow your eyes. Follow with your eyes, that's good. And back that way. Now follow up, and down, and now follow it in. That's good. Now just screw your eyes up tight, like this. That's good. Tight, close your eyes tight. Well done. Now blow your cheeks out for me. Fine. Now can you put your tongue out for me? And waggle your tongue side to side. That's great. Let's just do that finger nose test. Remember, with that finger, touch my finger, touch your nose. Touch my finger, touch your nose. Touch my finger, touch your nose. That's very good. And now do it with your other hand. Touch my finger and touch your nose. Well done. And again. Fine. Now, can we now see how you walk? I'd like to just take a video picture of you walking across the studio. Okay, Ivy, do you want to just walk towards me? Just walk nice and calmly. That's very good. Now can you turn back and walk quickly back the other way? Walk as quickly as you can. That's very good. And once more back this way. That's very good. Well done. All right. Is that difficult? You don't have any problems with your walking? And just walk back once more.
Motivated.
It's just getting going, is it? It's a problem. All right. Well done. And once more back this way. Now try and walk on the line this time. That's good. Okay. Fine. Thanks very much indeed, Ivy. Hello again, Ivy. How are you feeling today?
Pretty good.
Okay. Now, it's a couple of years since we did our last recording,
Right.
and I wanted to see how things have come along in the last 2 years. How do you feel in yourself? Are you feeling well?
No, my memory thing
What's the problem with your memory?
gone completely.
Has it?
Just
Do you remember?
I was
Mhm.
thinking
Mhm.
that one in Bronx. Yeah, to this day.
So,
And
what?
I'm tired in the afternoon.
Right.
I have to sleep 2 hours in the afternoon.
So tiredness and loss of memory are the two problems that you've
Of
noticed.
this day. in town.
Is it all your memory, or is it things that just happened that give you the biggest problem?
Oh, things that happened. Because they take me out, you see, out for a drink in the evening. Down at the house. Take me out.
And can you remember things that happened 5-10 minutes ago better than things that happened 20 years ago? Or
Yeah.
are you better with things that happened a long time back? Can you remember back in the old days when you were working as a nurse?
That part.
Hmm?
That part I don't have. I don't remember good enough nursing.
You don't remember very much about the nursing now?
No, but it was. The thing in my life, you see, I was 21 years and
Right. And how old were you when you started nursing?
19,
You were 19. And where did you train in nursing?
Edinburgh.
In Edinburgh. Did you like it there?
Very good.
Nice town. Oh, it's a city, isn't it? Okay. What I'd like to do now is just look at your eye movements a little bit, Ivy. Just look straight down that way into the light. Just lift your chin a little bit. Look at my finger. Now keep your head still. Keep your head still. Follow my finger with your eyes. Keep watching my finger all the time. Try not to take your eyes off it. Now look up. Look down. Look up. And down. Across the right. And across to the left. Now follow my finger as it comes in towards your nose. Okay. That's fine. Okay, Ivy, could you walk straight across here towards me? Straight towards me here. That's fine. Okay. Now can you turn around and walk straight back again? As fast as you can. Okay, and back to me once more. Keep coming. Straight back.
I don't walk a straight line.
I know. Why is that? Do you feel a bit unsteady?
Unsteady.
Right. Let's see if we walk together. Let's see how you can walk together. Hold my arm. Let's just walk together now. Do you find it easier if you've got someone to hold on to?
At that time, yes.
Yes. Okay. And tell me about your diet. How much do you eat a lot?
I eat porridge in the morning.
Do you feel hungry a lot?
7:30.
7:30 you have porridge.
in the morning.
Right. And do you like eating?
Yes.
Do you like your food?
Yes, I love food. Good appetite. And I eat my breakfast.
And do you have problems swallowing your food?
No.
No problems with you swallowing?
No problem at all. I just have a good appetite and good eating.
Okay.
Unlike Huntington's disease, most autosomal dominant disorders are not fully penetrant, and we can do something about it. The commonest referral now for a genetic clinic is people at risk of inherited cancer, and the next two clips relate to people who have been referred because of a risk of developing colon cancer. Selina, Dominic, it's nice to meet you. My name is John Byrne. I'm a consultant in clinical genetics. Can I start by asking you how you got here? Who sent you to the clinic?
We've been referred here by well, starts off with the doctor, obviously, because I've had a problem with my colon, and it's obviously looking like it might be something genetic. I don't know anything about it.
So they suggested you came along to see us. Okay. Well, that's absolutely true, because the colonoscopy that you had done found that the reason you were passing blood in your motion was that you had lots of polyps in the wall of the colon. These are like little lumps that grow on the wall, and they can bleed and cause the symptoms that you had. But a lot of people have occasional ones of those, but you've got several hundred of them. And the reason for that is that you have a spelling mistake in a gene. Now, I know from the family history sheet that you sent in that, in fact, you are adopted, so you know nothing about your family. Why do you know anything about why you were adopted?
Not really. I know very little about it.
Do you know if either of your parents died young?
I know that my father died young, but I don't know anything more than that.
The reason I'm asking that is that, and the reason that we're very keen to get you into the hospital is because these polyps can become cancerous. And so very often, if people, the first time we find out about this is when people present at a very young age with a colon cancer. And obviously it's possible that your father actually had this condition, because it does run in families, which is obviously the reason that...
How possible is it? Is that?
Well, in a sense, it doesn't really matter enormously, because we can't easily track back to your family at this stage, because I know you were not from this area from the information you gave us, so it may be very difficult to get back to look into that. But we should try, because it's just possible that there are other family members further afield that we could contact. But I'm more interested at this stage in thinking about you and your own family. So this is what we call a dominant trait. I just need to explain that to you, because it's important to understand how it runs in families. But before I do, the important thing to say that you've already been told, I know, by the colorectal surgeons, is that the good news is that this is a treatable condition, that we found it in you before it's turned into a cancer in any of these polyps. And the great thing about the colon is it's something we can kind of do without. In evolutionary terms, we needed a colon because we used to eat lots of seeds and berries and probably needed it as an extra way of digesting food. But you can actually take out a whole length of the intestine and recreate, if you like, the rectum with a folded back piece of small intestine. And people can get very good outcomes from that, where effectively on the outside they look the same as anybody else. They sometimes go to the toilet a bit more frequently, but not dramatically so. And so there's a good chance that this can be dealt with very effectively.
So can I just... It's not that you're going to remove the polyps, it's that you're going to remove an entire section.
That's right. The reason for that is that taking polyps out carries a small risk of perforation if you do a lot of them.
Right.
And the question is whether we can get them all. I mean, there are thousands of them there. And so the danger is if we leave in the colon that you might develop a cancer in one of the polyps that's left behind. And so that's something for you to talk to your surgeon about. Sometimes the surgeons do just take out the big polyps, but by and large they prefer to take out the whole colon.
So if it transpires that I did get this from my dad, does that mean when children come along that's...
Yeah, and in fact almost it doesn't really matter whether you got it from your dad or it started with you as a copying mistake. The fact is that you have in your body a spelling mistake in a gene called the APC gene. And that's why you have this problem. Now we'll do some blood work to find the underlying spelling mistake in that gene. We don't always find it, but hopefully we will, and that will offer us some tests for the future. But let me just explain how it runs in families. I'm just going to go back a step. Everybody, you've heard of genes that we inherit from our mums and dads that determine all the physical things about us, how many arms and legs we have, what colour our eyes are, and everything else. Almost all of our genes come in matching pairs, so you get a copy from mum and a copy from dad. Now, what we know is that you've got a spelling mistake in one copy of the APC gene. So you've got one working copy of the gene and one with a spelling mistake. You can get by on the one working copy, but as your cells divide in the colon, they have to copy the genes as well. Every time you make a new lining cell, you have to make a new copy of the genes. And so now and again you'll make a mistake, and you can create a second copying mistake. So if that's in your colon, where every cell in your colon, every one of those millions of cells, only has one working copy, there's a very high risk of one of those cells losing the other copy, and that then starts the process to make a polyp and then going on towards a cancer. So the reason that you have these polyps is that you started with only one working copy of this gene. I might get a polyp just the same, but I'd have to lose both copies of the gene in the same cell for that to happen, and that's very much rarer and tends to happen much later in life.
So it's nothing to do with diet in any way.
It's probably influenced a little bit by what you eat as to how much these polyps develop, and we've done some research on that, but it doesn't seem like it's very easy to control the development of the polyps. Basically, they will come through to a greater or lesser extent, typically in your teens, and they become very obvious by the time you're into your 20s, as you are now. Now, the thing is that you've got, if you think about it, a 50-50 chance. So you've got one working copy of the gene in every cell of your body and one with a spelling mistake. It's a 50-50 chance whether you pass on the one that works or the one that doesn't. So on average, half your children would get the working copy and half the faulty copy of the gene. Now that's something that if we find the spelling mistake in the gene by testing your blood, we would be able to offer you a test during pregnancy. On the other hand, this is a treatable condition, and you know, you've grown up into adulthood and managed with it, and we've got lots of families where several people are affected by this and have been treated.
So it's not that on doing the test, and let's say that we discover that the faulty gene has been passed, there's nothing we can do about it.
Sure. So
Until
you
the
might
baby-
just say, well, we'll take the chance, it's 50-50 chance, but we can check the baby after the baby's born.
Essentially so that we can get a plan of action as soon as the baby's born to get the correct diet and the correct treatment.
And
ASAP.
basically the truth is, we don't need to test the baby straight after birth, because in the first few years of life you treat the baby just the same, and there's lots of debate about whether we leave the testing until later, and I would go with you to some extent on that. It's, if we find a spelling mistake in the gene, we could test the baby to see if the baby's inherited that, so we know to be prepared for checkups being introduced when they reach their just before they reach their teens. But some people decide to wait until the baby's 9 or 10, then do the test, and then do the checkups if they need it. But that's something we can discuss down the line. But the important thing, you understand why this